What if the cure for our most devastating genetic diseases wasn't hidden in a high-tech lab, but in a primitive, superstitious ritual? A brilliant geneticist makes the discovery of a lifetime, an ancient, unknown virus that can intelligently rewrite human DNA, erasing flaws with perfect precision. But is this a miracle, a gift from nature, or is it a power too ancient and dangerous to control? When the corporation that funded her research moves in to claim it, she must decide what is more important: scientific truth or sacred wisdom. The hum of the cooling fans was the only sound in the lab, a low, constant whisper that did nothing to soothe the screaming in Dr. Elara Vance's mind. Before her, floating in the sterile blue-white light, was the enemy. It wasn't a person or a monster. It was a sequence, a string of glowing letters projected in a holographic display. G, A, C, T, T, C, A. A river of information, beautiful and deadly. She knew this particular sequence better than her own. It was the stutter in the code of life, the expanded trinucleotide repeat that spelled out Huntington's disease, a death sentence written in the very language of creation. With a practiced, weary gesture, she initiated the simulation. Her latest attempt. A new CRISPR-Cas9 delivery system, a viral vector she'd designed herself, elegant and precise. On the display, a microscopic scalpel of her own making descended upon the flawed code. For a breathtaking moment, it worked. The scalpel isolated the stuttering repeat, excised it, and then the whole structure shuddered. The DNA strand, the very helix of life, fragmented. The simulation flashed red. Cascade failure, catastrophic mutation. Elara closed her eyes, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Another failure. Science, the great and powerful Oz of her life, had pulled back the curtain to reveal another dead end. Her gaze fell upon the only personal item on her sterile workstation, a small, worn photograph in a simple silver frame. Two girls, squinting in the summer sun. One was her, younger, a gap-toothed smile. The other was Maya, her little sister. Maya, who had the same brilliant eyes as Elara, and the same flawed code floating in that holographic display. Maya, who had danced and laughed and lived with a fire that burned twice as bright and half as long, until the stutter in her code had finally, cruelly, silenced her. Elara reached out and traced the outline of her sister's face with her fingertip. The frustration that had been a low hum in her chest now hardened into a familiar, cold grief. Science was supposed to be the answer. It was the only thing that made sense in a world of chaos. But against this, against the ghost in her family's genes, her science was powerless. The dean's office was the antithesis of her lab. All warm woods, plush leather, and the faint, expensive scent of ambition. Elara stood feeling out of place in her practical lab coat, a ghost of last night's failure still clinging to her. Across the mahogany desk, Julian Croft smiled a predator's smile, all perfect teeth and charisma. He was from OmniGen, the kind of pharmaceutical giant that bought and sold miracles. His presentation glowed on the wall-mounted screen behind him. "Dr. Vance," he began, his voice smooth as polished stone. "We at OmniGen are admirers of your work, your tenacity. We know about your personal connection to the Huntington's project." Elara's jaw tightened. She hated when they used Maya as leverage. Julian clicked to the next slide. A photograph appeared, breathtaking and strange. A village, nestled in a valley so green it hurt the eyes, shrouded in a thick, ethereal mist. It looked like a place lost to time. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush, "is Aonach, a village in the most remote part of the Scottish Highlands. Population, 112. And in 200 years of detailed parish and medical records, not a single recorded case of hereditary disease. No cystic fibrosis, No sickle cell. No Huntington's. Elara stared at the image. It was impossible. A statistical anomaly of that magnitude just didn't happen. It was a fantasy, a genetic Garden of Eden. "There's a mistake in the data," she said flatly. "Or it's incomplete." "It's not," Julian replied, leaning forward. "We've had observers there for a year. We've acquired preliminary samples. The data is clean, too clean. It's as if their genetic code actively prunes itself, corrects flaws before they can manifest." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Imagine, Doctor, a natural mechanism that does what your CRISPR simulations are trying to do, a cure that already exists. We want you to go there. Find it. We're offering you a blank check, unlimited funding, a state-of-the-art mobile laboratory, a full support team on call, all the resources of OmniGen at your disposal." He clicked to the final slide. It was just text, a simple, brutal sentence. "The end of genetic disease." He didn't have to say her sister's name. It hung in the air between them, the ghost in the machine. He was offering her the one thing she wanted more than anything in the world. Not fame, not money. A chance to fight the enemy that had taken her sister. A chance to win. "When do I leave?" she asked. The road to Aonach was less a road and more a suggestion, a ribbon of crumbling asphalt clinging to the side of a mountain. The OmniGen mobile lab, a marvel of modern engineering, felt like a lumbering beast in this ancient land. Mountains, vast and purple with heather, loomed on all sides, their peaks lost in a low-hanging blanket of cloud. Waterfalls of pure, cold water cascaded down rock faces that had been old when the pyramids were new. It was a place of savage, breathtaking beauty. Elara saw none of it. Inside the climate-controlled sterility of the lab, she was in her element. Her world was one of humming servers, blinking indicators, and the clean, orderly interface of her monitors. She moved with practiced efficiency, calibrating sensors, running diagnostics, prepping sterile sample containers. The wild, chaotic world outside the reinforced window was just a variable to be ignored. It was data, unquantified, and therefore irrelevant. Her focus was on the mission, on the tangible, measurable proof she was here to find. This landscape held a secret, and she was here to extract it, to translate its ancient, messy language into the clean, universal binary of science. She didn't need to appreciate its beauty. She needed to dissect its biology. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, casting the glens in long, deep shadows, the van finally rolled into the village of Aonach. It was smaller than the pictures suggested, a handful of stone cottages huddled together as if for warmth against the immensity of the surrounding highlands. Peat smoke, thick with the smell of earth and thyme, curled from the chimneys. There were no paved streets, just a track of packed dirt. As Elara stepped out of the van, the hum of its generator sounding like an alien intrusion, she felt a dozen pairs of eyes on her. Villagers paused what they were doing, watching her with a quiet, unnerving stillness. They weren't hostile, not exactly. They were just watching. An old man emerged from the largest of the cottages, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. His face was a testament to the wind and the sun, a roadmap of deep lines. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. This had to be Kalen, the village elder Julian had mentioned. "You'll be the doctor," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was soft, with the lilting cadence of the Highlands. "Dr. Vance," Elara confirmed, extending a hand. "I'm here to study the remarkable health of your community." Kalen ignored her hand, his eyes twinkling with a kind of ancient amusement. He looked from her to the massive futuristic van, then back. "We are healthy, it's true," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It is because we keep the old ways. We listen to the Glen." Elara offered a polite, professional smile in return, the kind she gave to people who talked about healing crystals or astrology. "The Glen," she repeated, her tone pleasant but dismissive. I'll be sure to factor that in. For now, my work will be mostly focused on diet, water quality, and of course, genetics. Kaelin's smile didn't waver. He simply nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. You will look for your answers in the blood and the bone, he said softly. But the answer is in the listening. He turned and walked back toward his cottage, leaving Elara standing alone in the center of the quiet, watchful village, the first chill of the Highland night beginning to settle around her. The first few days in Aonach were a blur of methodical work. Elara established a rapport with the villagers, or at least a functional tolerance. They allowed her to take blood samples, cheek swabs, hair follicles. They answered her questions with a placid, almost frustrating simplicity. And then she retreated to the sterile cocoon of her lab and began the real work, the sequencing. Now, days later, she was surrounded by the fruits of that labor, and she was drowning in perfection. Holographic data streams filled the air, shimmering columns of light that represented the genetic code of an entire village. And every single one was flawless, not just free of major hereditary defects, but pristine. The usual genetic noise, the harmless mutations, the dormant viral DNA, the quirks and stutters that made every human genome a unique and messy tapestry, was simply gone. It was like looking at 100 different prints of the exact same master file. It was beautiful, it was elegant, and it was utterly, fundamentally impossible. "No," she muttered, pacing the narrow confines of the van. "No, it's an error. Has to be." Her eyes darted to the sequencer, a gleaming silver box that was the pinnacle of genomic technology. It was her most trusted instrument, an extension of her own mind. She ran a level 1 diagnostic. Results: nominal. She ran a level 2, a deep core analysis that tested every circuit and sensor. Results: optimal functioning. She recalibrated the entire system, a 4-hour process, and ran the first sample again. The result was the same. A perfect, impossible sequence glowed back at her. This wasn't science. This was a violation of its laws. Genetics was the study of variation, of beautiful, chaotic, life-giving mistakes. This data had no mistakes. It was static. It was sterile. With a cry of pure, unadulterated frustration, Elara slammed her fist down on the cool metal of the console. The holographic displays flickered for a second, the perfect code wavering like a ghost before stabilizing, mocking her with its impossible truth. If the answer wasn't in their genes, it had to be in their environment. Logic dictated her next move. Elara left the maddening perfection of her lab and turned her attention to the village itself. She became a methodical spectre, moving through Aonach with a case full of scientific instruments. She tested the water from the deep stone-lined well, its mineral content pure but unremarkable. She analyzed the dark, rich soil from their gardens, finding nothing more than a healthy biome. She took samples of their food, the hardy greens, the smoked fish from the river, the dense, dark bread they baked. It was a simple, healthy diet, but not magical. When she interviewed the villagers, her frustration only grew. She would ask a woman about the herbs she used in her cooking, and the woman would reply, "Whatever the glen provides." She asked a man how he knew the best time to plant, and he'd say, "Kaelin reads the signs." Every question about their tangible, measurable life was met with a simple, almost folkloric answer that pointed back to the village's collective wisdom, a wisdom invariably channeled through their elder. And Kaelin was always there. He never approached her, never interfered. But as she knelt to bag a soil sample, she would feel a prickle on her neck and look up to see him watching from the doorway of his cottage. As she charted the flow of the stream that fed the well, she would catch a glimpse of him standing on a high crag, looking down at her, his expression unreadable. It wasn't menacing, but it was unnerving. It was the look of a man who held an answer he knew she wasn't equipped to understand, watching a fool search for keys in a room that had no locks. That night, the pressure found a new way in. a call from a world away. Julian Croft's face materialized on her main screen, his office bright and modern, a stark contrast to the encroaching Highland darkness outside her window. His smile was gone, replaced by a look of strained impatience. "Elara, progress report," he said, skipping the pleasantries. "The work is ongoing, Julian," she hedged, choosing her words carefully. "I'm encountering some anomalous data." "Anomalous how?" "The genomic sequences are clean, too clean to be real. There's no variation, no junk DNA, nothing. I'm starting to think the primary factor isn't genetic. It has to be environmental." Julian sighed, a sound of pure corporate exasperation. "An unknown environmental factor isn't something we can synthesize and put in a bottle, Elara. The board was hoping for a genetic marker, a protein, something tangible we can patent. This was supposed to be your specialty. You have the best equipment money can buy. What could you possibly be missing?" The question hung in the air, a subtle accusation that pricked at her professional pride and her personal insecurities. He was right. She was Dr. Elara Vance. She solved genetic puzzles. But this wasn't a puzzle. It was a paradox. "Find me something, Elara," he said, his voice softening into the manipulative purr she remembered from their first meeting. "Think of what this could mean. A world without the diseases that... well, a world without the diseases we've all lost people to." He didn't have to say Maya's name. He had laid the weight of that hope and that failure squarely back on her shoulders. The call ended, leaving Elara alone in the humming silence of her lab, feeling the walls of the mystery closing in. Hours later, sleep refusing to come, she was startled by a sound drifting through the lab's soundproofed walls. It was faint, rhythmic, and deeply human. Chanting. It was coming from the woods at the edge of the village. Her curiosity, a restless and demanding thing, took over. Grabbing a tablet, she slipped out of the van and followed the sound, the night air cold on her face. She found them in a hidden clearing, a circle of moss-covered stones that looked impossibly ancient. A bonfire in the center cast flickering shadows. The village's adolescents, boys and girls on the cusp of adulthood, stood in a solemn line. Caelan moved among them, his voice rising and falling in a language she didn't recognize, an old Gaelic chant that seemed to vibrate in the very soil beneath her feet. Elara stayed hidden behind the largest of the standing stones, a silent scientific observer at a sacred rite. One by one, the adolescents approached a large, flat stone at the head of the circle. Caelan would dip his fingers into a stone bowl, scooping up a dollop of a dark, thick paste, and anoint the youth's forehead. His touch was gentle, his words a soft murmur. The ritual was quiet, intense, and profoundly strange. There was no wildness, no frenzy, just a deep, abiding solemnity. With a practiced motion, Elara raised her tablet, zooming in to capture the details. The texture of the paste, the symbols Caelan traced, the placid expressions on the faces of the children. This was data, a cultural artifact. She created a new file, her fingers typing out a label that made sense to her world, a label that could contain and categorize what she was seeing. File name, Aonach, Right, 101, tags, adolescent, coming of age, folkloric. Notes, possible psychosomatic influence on community health. Ritualistic belief system appears to be a key cohesive element. She saw a tradition. She saw a superstition. She had no way of knowing she was looking directly at the answer she had been searching for. The image of the ritual haunted Elara's sleepless night. It was the one variable she couldn't account for, the one piece of data that didn't fit. Her scientific mind, trained to find patterns in chaos, kept returning to the dark paste, to Caelan's solemn expression. It was illogical, it was superstition, but all her logic had led her to a wall of impossible perfection. And on the other side of that wall was a ritual in the woods. Before the first hint of dawn, while the village was still wrapped in slumber and mist, she slipped out of the lab. The air was cold and damp, smelling of wet earth and wood smoke. She moved quickly, quietly, her boots making little sound on the soft ground. In the clearing, the standing stones were like silent, sleeping giants. The embers of the bonfire were a pile of grey ash. She felt a profound sense of trespass, the unease of an atheist in a cathedral. Her eyes found the flat, moss-covered stone used as an altar. There, in a shallow crevice, was a small, dark smear, a remnant of the paste. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her protocols, her ethics, her promise to the university and to OmniGen all screamed at her to stop. This was a violation, a desecration of a sacred space for a sample she had no permission to take. But the scientist in her, the part of her that was fueled by a relentless need to know, was stronger. That part of her whispered that answers were more important than rules. With a trembling hand, she pulled a sterile scraper and a small container from her pocket. She glanced around the empty clearing, the feeling of being watched now an almost physical pressure. It felt like robbing a tomb. With a quick, decisive movement, she scraped the dark, clay-like substance into the container and sealed it shut. The silence that followed felt accusatory. Back in the sanctioned sterility of the mobile lab, the guilt receded, replaced by the familiar thrill of discovery. She prepped a slide, her movements precise and economical. She had a dozen theories about what the paste might be. A psychoactive fungus, a mixture of local herbs with anesthetic properties, perhaps even a simple clay with minerals that promoted a placebo effect. She placed the slide under the high-powered digital microscope, leaned in, and adjusted the focus. What appeared on the monitor destroyed every one of her theories. It was not pollen. It was not soil. It was not plant matter. Floating in the magnified field was a structure of impossible beauty and design. It was crystalline, a shimmering, geometric lattice that seemed to have been grown rather than formed. And it was alive. A soft, internal light pulsed within it, a steady, rhythmic beat like a microscopic heart. It looked biological, but it was unlike any cellular or microbial structure she had ever seen or read about. It was alien, a piece of biology that didn't belong in any known kingdom of life. She stared, her breath caught in her throat. The data from the gene sequencer had been a violation of the laws of science. This thing on her screen felt like a violation of the laws of reality itself. Doubt, a cold and creeping thing, began to truly take root in her mind. Her entire education, her life's work, had no category for what she was looking at. For the next day, the world outside the lab ceased to exist. Elara worked in a fever of obsessive focus, fueled by coffee and the dizzying pull of the unknown. The first step was to isolate the biological component from the clay-like medium. Under centrifugal force, the shimmering crystals separated, a tiny glowing pellet at the bottom of a test tube. This was it, the agent, the miracle, the monster. She loaded the purified sample into the gene sequencer. The machine whirred to life, its internal lasers reading the sample at the molecular level. And then it began to scream. Not with sound, but with data. Code flew across the holographic display, a torrent of information so vast and complex, the lab's powerful processors struggled to map it. The genome was gigantic, orders of magnitude larger than any known bacterium or fungus. It could only be one thing. A virus, she whispered, her voice hoarse. A virus with a crystalline structure and a genome that dwarfed the human one. She initiated a search, cross-referencing the partial sequence against every genetic database on the planet. GenBank, the WHO, even classified military bioweapon archives she had clearance for. She was searching for a relative, a distant cousin, anything that could help her classify this impossible organism. After an hour of processing, the results came back. A single, stark message on the screen. No match found. This virus was new. It was unknown. And judging by the complexity of its code, it was ancient. She was using the pinnacle of 21st century technology to look at something that had been hiding in the dark, in the soil and stone of this forgotten valley. For millennia, night fell again. The lab was dark, save for the glow of the displays. Elara felt like she was on the edge of a cliff, staring into an abyss of understanding. She had the pieces, the impossibly perfect genes of the villagers, the strange, solemn ritual. And now, this ancient, unclassifiable virus. But how did they connect? The question sparked a wild, desperate idea. A leap of logic so audacious it felt more like an act of faith than science. With trembling fingers, she called up a file from her archives. A familiar, hated string of code filled the air. The Huntington's sequence. Maya's sequence. Her own personal ghost. She then opened a new window, loading the massive, newly decoded genome of the Aonach virus. She was going to put them in the same room and see what happened. She initiated a new simulation, a new virtual petri dish. On the screen, the flawed strand of human DNA hung in space, the stuttering, disease-causing repeat flashing in red. She introduced the viral code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the virus's code began to move. It swarmed the human DNA, but not like an infection. It was an inspection. It moved with a terrifying, visible intelligence. It identified the CAG repeat, the flaw. A section of the viral code then detached, surrounded the flawed section, and in a move of biological engineering so advanced it looked like magic, it snipped the stuttering code out. The gap in the human DNA glowed. And then, the virus did the impossible. It used its own code as a template to write a new, healthy sequence in its place. The red warning light vanished. The DNA strand shimmered, whole and perfect. Cured. Elara stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. The lab spun around her. The ritual, the chanting, the superstitious paste. It wasn't superstition. It was a delivery system. It was a medical procedure. It was a form of gene therapy so sophisticated, so precise, it dwarfed everything humanity had ever achieved. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow, shattering her worldview, her pride, her entire understanding of the universe. She fell into her chair, staring at the healed code on her screen, and breathed a single, broken word. Impossible. The simulation of the healed DNA strand burned on the holographic display, a miracle of science that felt like a sacrilege. Elara's world had been turned inside out. The rigid framework of her scientific understanding, the very foundation of her reality, had been shattered into a million pieces. There was only one person who could explain it, one person who had known the truth all along. Carrying her tablet like a peace offering, she walked through the sleeping village to Caelan's cottage. A single lamp cast a warm glow from his window. He was awake, as if he had been expecting her. She didn't knock. She just stood in the doorway until he looked up from the book he was reading. He saw the tablet in her hands, saw the look on her face, and simply gestured for her to come in. She didn't speak. She just held out the tablet. On the screen, the animation played on a loop, the flawed DNA, the arrival of the crystalline virus, the intelligent, impossible act of healing. She wasn't accusing him. She was asking for help. Caelan watched the loop play twice, his expression serene. He was not surprised. "You have very clever eyes, Doctor," he said softly. "But they only see the pieces, not the whole." He invited her to sit by the small peat fire. The warmth was a stark contrast to the cold sterility of her lab. "You call it a virus, a thing to be isolated, studied, put in a bottle. We call it the Glen Spirit, and it is not a thing, it is a partner." He told her the story then, a story passed down through generations, not in books, but in firelight conversations just like this one. Centuries ago, their ancestors were dying, their bloodlines riddled with sickness. In their desperation, they made a pact with the spirit of the Glen, an ancient, living intelligence in the soil and the water. They offered it a home, a vessel to carry it through the ages, their own bodies. In return, the spirit would tend to them. "It weeds the garden of our bloodline," Caelan explained. his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. It keeps us whole. It is a part of us now, as much as the blood in our veins. He finally turned to look at her, his gaze sharp and serious. You are a healer, Doctor. I see that in you. But your medicine is the medicine of the knife. You cut things apart to see how they work. The spirit cannot be cut apart. To remove it from us, to study it like a dead thing on a glass slide, would be to break the pact. You would kill it. And in doing so, you would kill us. The weight of his words settled on Elara, heavier than any scientific truth she had ever known. Science and magic were two different languages describing the same impossible reality. And she, in her arrogant search for answers, was about to become a destroyer. The next morning, she knew she had to report her findings, but Kaylin's warning echoed in her mind. On the video call with Julian Croft, she chose her words with surgical precision. She was ecstatic, but a cold dread was a knot in her stomach. Julian, I've done it, she said, the words feeling hollow. It's not environmental. It's a biologically active agent, a symbiotic retrovirus that engages in natural gene therapy. It actively repairs genetic damage. This is it. This is the cure. Julian's face erupted in a predatory grin. I knew it. I knew you could do it, Elara. This is everything. But Julian, it's complicated, she started, trying to inject a note of caution. The relationship is symbiotic. The villagers believe. Symbiotic, perfect, he cut her off, his mind already racing miles ahead. We can market that. All natural, organic gene therapy. The board is going to go insane. Secure the samples, Elara. Secure everything. My boss is flying in personally. This is too big for a video call. You're going to be famous. The call ended. Elara stood in the humming silence of her lab, the screen dark. Her moment of scientific triumph had lasted less than a minute before it was twisted into a marketing slogan. She had lost control. She hadn't just made a discovery. She had revealed a secret, and now the world was coming to claim it. She had unleashed a force she could not possibly control. A few hours later, the sky itself seemed to tear open. A sleek black helicopter, a dragonfly of carbon fiber and steel, descended from the clouds, its rotors beating the air with a brutal rhythmic thud. It landed in a field just outside the village, the powerful downdraft flattening the ancient grasses and whipping a panicked wind through the quiet stone cottages. Villagers emerged from their homes, staring in silent apprehension at the invading machine. The door slid open, and a man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, ducking under the slowing blades. He was flanked by two stern-looking men in corporate security uniforms. The man in the suit was Dr. Marcus Albright, a titan of genetics, the man who had written the textbooks she'd studied in college, and her former mentor. Years ago, he had traded the lab for the boardroom at OmniGen, and in the process, had traded his soul for a stock portfolio. He strode toward her, his arms open, a warm, familiar smile on his face. Elara, he boomed. You magnificent woman, you've done it. He embraced her, but it felt cold, proprietary. He pulled back, his eyes sweeping over the small ancient village with a cold, possessive gleam. You found the Holy Grail? That night, the mobile lab felt like a cage. Albright sat at her console, swiping through her data, his initial warmth replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. Elara stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly together. The viral structure is unlike anything I've ever seen, he murmured, more to himself than to her. The efficiency of the reverse transcriptase, it's perfect, absolutely perfect. Marcus, we have to be careful, Elara said, her voice tight. I spoke with the village elder. The virus is a symbiont. It's been co-evolving with this population for centuries. We don't know what will happen if we isolate it or introduce it into a new population. Albright waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at her. Please, Elara, don't tell me you're listening to the ramblings of some primitive in a wool sweater. He's living in the dark ages. We are living in the light of scientific reason. He's living with the virus inside him, she countered. He knows things we don't. He knows folklore, Albright snapped, his patience gone. "We know science." He stood up, his demeanor shifting. "OmniGen's plan is simple. We secure the source of the virus. We synthesize its correcting mechanism. We patent it, and then we sell it. For a price, we will give the world the gift of perfect health." "You can't do that," Elara said, horrified. "This doesn't belong to us. To patent it, to sell it, it's unethical." Albright's friendly mentor persona vanished completely, replaced by a cold corporate fury. Unethical. Curing cancer is unethical. Eradicating Huntington's is unethical. Don't be naive. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And let's be very clear about one thing. Your contract states that all research, all data, and any and all biological samples discovered during this expedition are the exclusive intellectual property of the OmniGen Corporation." He tapped the console, displaying her life's greatest discovery. "This doesn't belong to us. It belongs to me. I am not asking for your cooperation, Doctor. I am demanding it." The ultimatum from Albright echoed in the sterile air of the lab, a declaration of war disguised as a business decision. Elara knew then that her discovery was no longer a potential cure for humanity, but a resource to be plundered. The fight for knowledge was over. The fight for wisdom, for the soul of Aonach, was about to begin. As the first grey light of dawn crept over the Highland peaks, Elara Vance sat before her life's greatest achievement and began to destroy it. It was an act of scientific heresy, a betrayal of every principle she had ever held. With methodical precision, she moved through her own data, the beautiful, perfect sequences she had marveled at just days before. She became a saboteur of truth, corrupting her own work. Key data points were deleted. Crucial markers in the viral genome were subtly altered, rendering the sequence non-replicable. She inserted flaws, noise, and dead ends, transforming the elegant code into a useless jumble of genetic gibberish. Every click of the keyboard was a strike against her own ambition, against the memory of Maya, against the very idea of a universal cure. She was destroying a miracle. She was saving a world. As she worked, a movement outside caught her eye. Kalen was standing by the ancient stone fence, watching her, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. Their eyes met through the reinforced glass of the lab. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep, quiet understanding. He raised his chin in a single, solemn nod, a silent acknowledgement of her choice, of her sacrifice. In that moment, she knew she was no longer alone. The confrontation came, as she knew it would, at the heart of the mystery. Albright's security team, led by a tracker with military-grade scanning equipment, had found it. A hidden spring, deep in a secluded part of the glen. It was a place of profound tranquility, where water trickled over moss-covered stones into a clear pool. The clay on the banks of the spring was dark and rich, the source. When Elara arrived, the scene was already a tense standoff. Albright's team, clad in black tactical gear and carrying sterile collection containers, formed a cordon around the spring. Facing them were Kalen and a dozen villagers. They carried no weapons, only the unyielding resolve of a people protecting their most sacred place. Elara didn't hesitate. She walked past the security line and stood beside Kalen, placing her body between OmniGen and the spring. "This has gone far enough, Elara!" Albright's voice boomed as he strode into the clearing, his face a mask of cold fury. "You are obstructing corporate property. You are destroying your career. This isn't property, Marcus," she shot back, her voice clear and steady. "This is a living being, and it's not yours to take. Don't be a fool. We are on the verge of the greatest medical breakthrough in human history. You're on the verge of committing a crime against nature." The argument grew hotter, their voices sharp and angry, in the sacred silence of the glen. As they yelled, one of the security guards grew impatient and shoved a young villager who had stepped too close. The villager stumbled back, knocking into a table of equipment. A large, sealed container, holding a raw, concentrated sample of the paste, teetered for a moment, then crashed to the ground. The lid popped off, and a thick, dark slurry splashed outward, spattering across the exposed skin of Albright's hand. A sudden, shocked silence fell over the clearing. For a moment, nothing happened. Albright looked down at his hand, an expression of annoyance on his face as he wiped at the mud-like substance. Then his expression changed. His eyes widened in confusion, then in pain. Red, angry veins began to crawl up his arm from the point of contact, branching out under his skin like lightning. The virus, raw and untempered, without the centuries of symbiotic adaptation the villagers' bodies provided, was encountering his flawed, ordinary DNA. It didn't recognize it as a garden to be tended. It recognized it as an alien invader, a corrupting influence to be attacked and destroyed with catastrophic efficiency. Albright let out a choked cry and collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing in agony. The holy grail he had come to possess had become his poison. The corporate security team flew into a panicked frenzy, their mission of extraction forgotten in the face of their boss's terrifying medical emergency. They hauled the whimpering, agonized Albright toward the helicopter, but before they could load him in, Kalen stepped forward. He knelt beside Albright and applied a poultice of crushed leaves and herbs to his inflamed arm. The violent red reaction began to calm, the angry veins receding. Kalen had saved his life, but the damage was done. The terror in Albright's eyes was absolute. He had come face to face with a power he could not comprehend, and it had broken him. As the roar of the helicopter faded into the distance, a profound quiet settled over the glen. Elara stood with Kalen by the spring, watching the sky. She looked at the sterile collection kits left scattered on the ground, then back toward the village where her mobile lab, her entire former life, sat waiting. She had seen the spirit's power to heal, and she had seen its power to destroy. She knew with a certainty that went deeper than science what she had to do. Dusk fell. On the narrow highland road, the OmniGen mobile lab began its slow journey away from Aonach. Its lights cut through the twilight, carrying away a cargo of corrupted data, useless research, and broken promises. But Elara was not inside. She stood on the side of the road with a single small bag at her feet, watching the symbol of her old life disappear around a bend. She had chosen to stay. She had chosen the village. She had chosen the mystery. Kalen approached and stood beside her, his presence a quiet comfort in the fading light. He said nothing. He didn't need to. There was a new understanding between them, an acceptance. Elara Vance, the brilliant scientist who had come seeking to dissect and control, was gone. In her place was a guardian, a woman who had surrendered her need for answers and had, in doing so, found a far deeper wisdom. The story of Dr. Vance and the Aonach village really makes you question the nature of knowledge itself. It's not a simple story of science proving superstition right. It's more complex than that. What's fascinating is the tension between two different ways of knowing. On one hand, you have the scientific approach, represented by Elara and her ex-mentor, Albright. They want to dissect, understand, quantify, and ultimately control the phenomenon. They have incredible knowledge of what the virus is, its genetic code, its structure. On the other hand, you have Kalen and his people. They have no idea what a virus or DNA is, but they possess a far more crucial understanding of how to live with this powerful force. Their wisdom is built on centuries of symbiosis, respect, and ritual. They don't have scientific knowledge, but they have a functional, life-sustaining truth. The story suggests that knowledge without wisdom is not just incomplete, it's dangerous. Albright's desire to own and patent the cure turns it into a poison. This leads to the ultimate dilemma Elara faces. Does she unleash this powerful but volatile knowledge on the world, or does she protect the quiet wisdom that keeps it in balance? So, what would you have done in her position? Is it right to sacrifice a potential cure for millions to protect the sacred wisdom of a few? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.